This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
It's now time for our first in-depth look at the 2026 Michigan football roster next on this week's episode of Michigan Podcast.
There's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Carter. Waits for it. Gets caught.
They said you can't beat Ohio State. Now what?
Brady gets terrific. Throws it, and in. Touchdown, Knight again. Schultz just before Frizzell got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, I'm Steve Dace, and with the transfer portal, I guess, closed, we don't really know. We don't really know what many of the rules of college football are these days, but technically it is, right? We're right up against the drop dead date. In fact, it's actually today. At the time we're taping this, January the 28th is when you've got to be enrolled full-time to be eligible at the University of Michigan. So with those two things now passed, we can now take our first, at least mostly official look at the 2026 Michigan football roster. So let's do so. First, I want to tell you how I break these players down. Who is or who is not an above replacement player? If Michigan were to gain them or to lose them, they would be beyond what's typically available in the transfer portal or the kind of player that Michigan could just routinely sign as part of its recruiting class, given the stature of the program. And so I define an above replacement player as a guy that is an incoming recruit that was a consensus top 200 recruit, or is a top 200 recruit that didn't play much in college football his first year, redshirted like a Jamie French we'll talk about in a minute, or a Kanewa Winston on last year's team. And then it could also be an above replacement player, someone who started and demonstrated above replacement production at their previous school. So here are the players that I have listed as above replacement players that were eligible to return to the University of Michigan for the 2026 season. In alphabetical order: Andrew Babalola, Zeke Berry, Shamari Earls, Blake Frazier, Jake Guinara, Justice Haynes, Ty Haywood, Jair Hill, Andrew Marsh, Jordan Marshall, Nate Marshall, Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng, Jimmy Rolder, Andrew Sprague, Cole Sullivan, Bryce Underwood, and Kanewa Winston. So there's 16 of those. And you can see now Michigan has retained 12 of them. That's outstanding. That's 75%. For a new staff that just started here right as the transfer portal was opening, within days. Several of them, the coaches didn't sign on until the portal had already opened, or just as it was about to within hours. That's just an outstanding job of retainment right there by the new Michigan staff. All right, what about newcomers? Who are the above replacement newcomers? Well, I've got Michigan bringing in 12 of those. J.J. Buchanan, the transfer from Utah. John Henry Daly, the transfer from Utah. Titan Davis, who's a recruit. Jamie French, the transfer from Texas. Savion Hyder, who's a recruit. Travis Johnson, a recruit. Jonah Leaea, who's the transfer from Utah. I think that's how that's pronounced, Jonah. Malachi Lee, a recruit. Carter Meadows, a recruit. You can see Michigan here. Now we throw in Celeste Moa, a recruit. That's 3 5-star recruits Michigan has in this class, despite firing the head coach. You can't make that up. Smith Snowden, the transfer from Utah. That's another above replacement player. And then Alistair Vallejo, the defensive tackle. Those are the 12 replacement players. That gives Michigan 28 as of right now. And hey, guys will not hit this mark. Other guys will develop if we did this list a year from now. But that's right now what I have as above replacement players on the Michigan roster, 28 of them. So what does this mean by position group? Well, let's take a look. At quarterback, we have no above replacement players lost. We are bringing one back in Bryce Underwood. And there's no above replacement players incoming, but there's a lot more depth. You have the LSU transfer in Colin Hurley, and then Braden Fowler-Nicolosi, who's the former starting quarterback at Colorado State the last few years. For the first time, Michigan in the last couple of years, Michigan has a backup that if a guy had to play a game or two, could at least manage a game. If you look at Fowler-Nicolosi, his production very similar to what we were hoping to get out of Mikey Keene last year, but because of injury did not. What about running back? So I think that position group is a clear upgrade over a year ago. Running back may not be an upgrade, and it will still be one of the best running back rooms in the country. You're losing Justice Haynes, but you're replacing Jordan Marshall. Quick little sneaky stat. Jordan Marshall had just as many runs over 50 yards or more than Justice Haynes did. Well, Jordan Marshall didn't get hurt. Remember, though, he didn't play much the first few weeks because Justice Haynes was dominating. Savion Hyder is the incoming above replacement player as the number one consensus running back recruit in the country. Then you throw in the late return of Bryson Cudsdall. It looks like Taylor Tatum, the former number one running back in the country, the transfer from Oklahoma, is going to actually start in the defensive backfield. We'll talk about that in a minute, but this is not a stronger unit than last year, but it will still be one of the strongest running back rooms in the country. And then the pass catcher room. This might be the most upgraded pass catcher room in all of college football. So Michigan had no above replacement players it was losing because we weren't any good. But here's who's returning. And Andrew Marsh. Then you have the newcomers, J.J. Buchanan, Jamie French, Travis Johnson, Celeste Moa, who's going to start at wide receiver. And that's just the most improved pass catcher room in America. Throw in a Hogan Hansen, who was hurt much of last year. And I mean, Bryce has the weapons that he lacked a year ago. And then the offensive line. I think this has the makings of a Joe Moore Award candidate offensive line, especially with Jim Harding, perhaps the best offensive line coach in college football, coming with Kyle Whittingham to Ann Arbor. You lost Ty Haywood, but you're bringing back above replacement Andrew Babalola, Blake Frazier, Jake Quinara, Andrew Sprague. You're bringing in Malachi Lee as an above replacement newcomer. You throw in guys like Evan Link, Nathan Afobe. These guys have started multiple games here and have done so as at least decent players. This has the makings of a very dominant offensive line. And most of the best teams at Michigan had dominant offensive lines. Now, what about on the defensive side? Because offensively, Michigan is loaded. Defensively, particularly in the front seven, there's more questions starting at the interior defensive line. Michigan is not returning any above replacement players, not losing any. It's bringing in 3 of them, but 2 of them, Titan Davis and Alistair Vallejo, are true freshmen. So how ready are they? And then you have the Utah transfer there and Jonah Leaea, who is a little undersized by Big Ten standards. So we are going to be asking Trey Pierce, Eno Etta, David Poly, Manuel Bagel. Some of these guys, a couple of these guys are going to take huge leaps from a year ago and where they were. At edge, the numbers don't say much, but I'm not that worried given Michigan's history at this position and Utah's history at this position as well. So you're not losing any above replacement players that you could have returned because Derek Moore exhausted his eligibility. So you have Nate Marshall, former 5-star recruit, coming back, and he popped in early action before he got hurt last year. You're bringing in the All-American from Utah, John Henry Daly, Carter Meadows, the number 1 edge recruit that Michigan has signed in history, behind only Rashawn Gary. So, I mean, that's a good starting block there. And then you have other former big-time recruits, Cam Brandt, Lugard Edepayi, Dominic Nichols. I have to think from that group of players, all right, from those 6 guys, that Michigan can find a couple of edge players that will be a major factor on next year's defense. And history says I'm right. Now, on the at linebacker, this is the most anemic position on the team. Now, the analytics say it's the least valuable, but you don't want to just, have primordial ooze there either. So Michigan is losing Jimmy Rolder and Cole Sullivan, both above replacement players. It's returning Nathaniel Uoso-Boateng, who I have rated as one based on his recruiting stock, but there are no incoming above replacement players. Michigan tried. They got outbid for one, and then admission stymied them on the other. So it's a good year to have a new DC like Jay Hill going to a nickel defense as a default, so you only need two. Right. And if you told me that, between Troy Bowles and Owusu-Boateng, those two would play every snap and be healthy, they wouldn't, light the world on fire, but they'd be okay. But that's highly unlikely given how physical the game is, the schedule Michigan's playing, how physical the position is. So we're playing darts here throughout the offseason heading into training camp. There's some coaching that needs to be done there and at the interior defensive line. Now, the secondary rooms I love. The cornerback room, this will be one of the best cornerback rooms in the country. You're not losing any above replacement players. You're returning second team All Big Ten Zeke Berry, Shamari Earls, former big time recruit, Jair Hill, who was honorable mention All Big Ten. You're bringing in Smith Snowden, who was All Big 12 a year ago. He's probably going to be the nickel in this nickel defense. You still have former big time recruit Josiah Edmond there. I mean, this will be one of the best cornerback rooms in rotations in the Big Ten Conference. And I like the way that safety is shaping up as well. You're not losing any above replacement players there. You have one returning. And then you have in Rod Moore, provided that he's anything close to what he's been before. But then you've got Mason Curtis, who's been solid when we've watched him in extensive action. Kanewah Winston, a former top recruit. Taylor Tatum moving here. And then Jordan Young, who flashed last year as a true freshman. So I think there's more than enough there to have at least a capable safety duo. So I think the secondary could be among the best in the conference. The edge group, the talent there and the history of both coaching staffs indicates they'll get it right there. Linebacker and interior defensive line. Again, let's just say there's going to be a lot of coaching happening there during the offseason. And then finally, the specialists. It's hard not to be more improved here because we were one of the worst special teams units I've ever seen Michigan have a year ago. So you have to think the return game will be better just by subtraction with no Samaj Morgan. And we saw Andrew Marsh really flash there at the end of last year. You have Pittsburgh transfer Trey Butkowski, who was sensational, 20 out of 23 on field goals last year. He's got a couple of years of eligibility. I don't think he's an upgrade over Dominic Zabata 2 years ago. Definitely an upgrade over Dominic Zabata last year. And then a huge upgrade at punter, just because we had one of the worst before, with Cameron Brown coming over from UNLV. So overall, I think this is definitely a more talented team than what we had a year ago. It's going to look different. Instead of a top 10 defense, and then, can we make a top 50 offense? I think it's more like, can we have a top 30 offense and maybe a top or top 30 defense and maybe a top 10 offense? And that's not typically how Michigan's best teams are engineered, but it's a new day and a new era. So we'll see. And in fact, when we come back, we're going to see what former Michigan quarterback David Cohn thinks about all of this next. And with that, let's get an expert opinion. David Cohn, former Michigan quarterback. Crane and Cohn is the show now on On3, I believe. David, congratulations on that and the rebrand, brother. How are you?
Thank you so much, man. As far as the expert opinion goes, that's what I came here to talk to you about. I see you as the expert, so I was hoping to get some information, but thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and we're very excited to have Crane and Cohn over with the On3 team.
So where can people find that show? The same places as before, or they got to go to new platforms?
Absolutely. Nope. Our YouTube channel, Crane and Cohn, and you can find us everywhere you get your podcasting from, and also our social media handles. And my personal social media is David Adam Cohn. Most of the social media handles have been changed over to Crane and Cohn. So please give us a follow, give us a subscribe. We actually had Isaiah Hole on the show today that just got released. So we had an entire Michigan portal breakdown on our show today as well. It must be going around, Steve.
Well, you guys do a fantastic job. You guys bring a ton of energy and knowledge. It's a great watch. So congratulations on On3 and the new platform there. And I know you'll just continue to grow. So let's start picking your brain. All right. So you had a chance to hear what I just kind of laid out to the audience, how I divvied up the roster. First of all, let's start with that from a big picture point of view. I'm trying to, as best I can as a layman, there's over 10,000 players went in the transfer portal, right? Okay. And so to me, there's Jags, just a guy. And then sometimes with the right coach, you can be like a Jag plus, right? Like maybe you're a plus player for that school, but on an open market, maybe you're not a plus player on your own, if you know what I'm trying to say, right? And then there's an above replacement player. And to me, with Michigan's resources, I kind of think we should only focus on above replacement players you either gain or you lose, because you're not a group of 5 school. You're going to be able to replace the depth pieces that you want to develop later on. And so what I had for Michigan in my rundown is 28 16 above replacement players that were eligible to return in the last year. And the new staff, I have retaining 12 of them, which is 75%. And really the two I think that matter the most are the ones you're missing at the linebacker position. And we'll get to the position by position breakdown. But what do you think of just looking at that just from a big picture standpoint, looking at it from that angle?
I'm so excited for this Michigan team, Steve. And like I told you a month ago, I would rather get the head coach from the top down and the coaching staff in place rather than just obsess over keeping a couple guys as far as retention goes. And like I told you, when Jim Harbaugh left, Michigan was kind of behind the 8 ball, having played in the national championship. Then Jimmy doesn't decide for another week that he's going to go to the NFL. And so it made sense to elevate Sharon Moore and keep that core roster together. But now Kyle Whittingham's going to come in, and I think Michigan football is going to be in a better place from that standpoint. And then also, I think there are improvements on the roster. I'm a little bit surprised to see my colleagues over at On3 have Michigan ranked 68 right now in the transfer portal rankings. But like we just talked about with Isaiah Hole over on our show, Crane and Cone, Michigan was very targeted in terms of who they went after. And I think that they're going to have a lot of great pieces on the offensive side of the ball. A lot of those offensive linemen who went into the transfer portal end up coming back to Michigan. I mean, that's a staple you can build around with a core group of guys. I mean, think about it, Steve. The 5th best offensive lineman is still a starter. The 2nd best quarterback never plays mostly, but the 5th best offensive lineman is still a starter on your football team. If you can keep that core group of guys together, that's very exciting. Obviously, I think Andrew Marsh, we've talked about him before. I think he can be a top 5 wide receiver in the country. Let's see what someone like Jamie French can do coming over from Texas. The running back room was very interesting to me because you and I discussed at nauseum, can we keep Justice Haynes, or is he just a surefire NFL pick? Well, he didn't declare for the NFL. He did enter the transfer portal. He's going to Georgia Tech, and somehow Michigan's running back room feels very, very good with Jordan Marshall returning and Kuzdor returning, and you keep the number 1 overall recruit, which I just read a report right before I joined here. Savion Hyder was the number 1 overall running back recruit wire to wire in Rivals rankings, and one of the top-rated running back recruits to come out in the last several years. You retain him even through a coaching change, and you get the kid to come over from Oklahoma. Sounds like he may start in the safeties room, so I'm kind of interested to see where he'll end up. That gets me into a little bit of the negative, Steve, which is the front 7 on defense. That has been an absolute staple this decade with Michigan football. There's 2 groups that Michigan football has proven to be able to reload and replace with the best in the country, the Georgias of the world, the Buckeyes of the world. That's the defensive line, and that's been the running back room. And you think about all these great names that Michigan has just been able to throw out there on the defensive front 7, really game changers. Even in down years, you were able to have a Mason Graham and a Kenneth Grant combo be able to change the trajectory of a game, like against the Buckeyes when we were able to beat them in 24. I don't know if you really have that now. Obviously, they address some certain positions coming off the edge there. When you get guys like John Henry Daly coming over from Utah and some of the guys that they're going to bring. But I would say that Michigan was very targeted in their approach to the transfer portal, and why you didn't go get some of the biggest names in the world that make you turn your head. I think they got the guys that they want to have there and that they can develop.
I think without question, overall, this roster is more talented than it was at the end of last year.
Yes. No, I agree with that. And again, I think that it's You say more talented. It's more right for this coaching staff to be able to come in and develop. Again, I do worry a little bit with all the defensive front seven with some of those guys who are going to the NFL. And I have to say, Cole Sullivan transferring out to Oklahoma, that did hurt as far as the transfer portal guys. I think that he can be a terrific football player. But with who they brought in, I'm very excited. Now, that kind of gets me into the schedule, though, Steve. There is a scenario that exists where this team could perform better on the field, play more disciplined football, but have a same or worse record, because I think a lot of people underestimate just how manageable that 2025 schedule was. It's going to be very difficult here going into 2026. But Steve, how else would you want it as a Michigan fan? You're going to host Oklahoma now instead of going on the road to them. You get to play Indiana after winning a national championship, going 16-0 there for the Hoosiers. How else would you want it? We want a schedule like that, and we want a chance to repeat what happened in 2023, which is to win it all.
I've not had a chance to do this exercise for teams around the country, but I have on Michigan's roster right now. And here's how I determine if someone is an above replacement player. Is it an incoming recruit that is considered top 200 overall? Or is it a redshirt like a Kanewah Winston, who was considered a top 100 recruit but didn't play at all last year? And Jamie French would be in that category, right? Basically redshirted at Texas, but was considered a top 50, 60 overall recruit. Or is it someone that demonstrated out of the transfer portal at their previous school that they are an above replacement starter in terms of their production? And I think Michigan's getting 3 of those out of Utah in the wide receiver / tight end Buchanan. You mentioned John Henry Daly, who was an All-American last year. And then the defensive tackle, Lalea, I think is his last name. And so I think that's how I'm ranking who is above replacement or not. I mean, you're a former player. You do this full time. I don't. I mean, what do you think about using that as your criteria? I
actually really liked your criteria, the way that you listed it. And in addition to that, how can some of these really young guys contribute right off the bat? When we talk about Savion, obviously, when you're the number 1 running back recruit, you're going to get touches as a freshman. How does that work out? How is he incorporated? Also, Carter Meadows, coming off the edge, how much does he need to contribute as a freshman, as an 18-year-old, a young guy? And then also with Jay Hill's defense, with him running, primarily a permanent nickel defense, how much will that help some of the lack of depth there at the linebacker position? Again, my mind just keeps going back to this front seven, because that's how Michigan changed the dynamic of football games in that 3-year stretch there under Jim Harbaugh, and even really into Sharon Moore's tenure. And that's how the best teams do it. We just saw Miami make the national championship game in large part because of what they were able to do on that defensive front seven. So my mind keeps going back there, even with guys like John Henry Daly, who you said was an All-American, coming off the Achilles injury. There are a lot of question marks there. But again, you get help in the secondary with retaining both corners and being able to get some guys back. And again, that targeted approach from Michigan, I think, is really going to help. But I like the criteria that you laid out. I'm very excited for this season of Michigan football. And again, because I think that the culture from the top down is going to be right. This team won 9 games a year ago, Steve, with what we found out transpire was like a Mickey Mouse club from the head coach on down. And that situation, I'll continue to repeat, is a travesty. It's very sad. I'm still praying for everyone that was involved in that, because it is a catastrophe. It's embarrassing. And I hate the way that Michigan football had to get better over the course of this last month with everything that transpired with Sharon Moore. But let's don't hide the fact that they did get better and they did improve in several crucial areas.
So I agree with your thoughts on the 2 problematic spots. Let's discuss them a little bit more in depth, David. So linebacker. Right now, analytics in both college and pro football will tell you that by far, other than specialists, the position that has the least to do with winning a game or not is the linebacker position. Just the nature of how football is played at the college and pro level with perpetual spread offenses. I mean, you mentioned we're going to now a nickel defense is sort of a default. That's a lot of what Jesse Minter ran the 2 years that he was here at Michigan as well, was a nickel defense as the default. If you told me that I have, based on how highly regarded of a recruit he was, I have Nathaniel Owosu-Boateng listed as an above replacement player. If you told me that him and Troy Bowles, who played a lot last year, and I mean, you didn't notice him a lot, either good or bad, That's kind of the definition of a jag, right? He wasn't out there Samaj Morganing the team, but you didn't like watch him in game time thinking, wow, we really got something there. He was okay. All right. If you told me in Jay Hill's defense that those two guys were the linebacker duo and they were going to take every single snap, I'd be like, all right. I mean, I don't know, win you any games, won't lose you any games. I think we'll be fine. But that's a very violent position. That's one of the reasons why the positional value is so low. You're constantly, facing violence at that position. So the likelihood of that, not very high. They did try to get a couple of above replacement players there. They tried to get the Biles kid out of Pitt. We got outbid for him. Then we tried to get the Uvalde, I think was the kid out of Cal. Admissions reared its ugly head where he's concerned. And those were there were only a few above replacement linebackers in the entire portal. Just our guy Cole Sullivan happened to be one of them. So it appears the strategy has been since then, you know what, we'll make it up in volume. Just get as many, depth pieces at linebacker as you can. And maybe we can coach one of them up. One or two of those guys can be at least a jag or a jag plus. That appears to be the game plan at that position right now. And of course, the position coach there, Alex Whittingham, the coach's son, I mean, he's showing up for work the first day with about 3 Super Bowl rings, having worked for the Kansas City Chiefs. So he's got to know something, right? What are your thoughts on what I just said there on the linebacker spot?
So admissions is still a thing, Steve? Okay, I didn't realize that was still going on in the country.
We're still playing school a little bit at your alma mater there, David. We're one of the few, but we are still playing school, yes.
That's why my diploma still means something over here. But in terms of volume over quality of player, I heard that last year, right, when Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant from the defensive line went to the NFL, and they said, but hey, listen, Steve, we're going to rotate 10 guys on the defensive line. Okay, that sounds good.
And then you almost never heard their names on game day the whole season. None of them.
Is that as good as just having one balls to the wall difference maker? I don't think that it is, even though, look, if I'd rather have the depth at the position than be weak and have absolutely nothing at all. In terms of the way linebacker play has changed, look, there's a lot of different ways to have success on the defensive side of the football. If you said you could have Lawrence Taylor or Ray Lewis right now in their prime playing Mike on that defense, yes, let's do it. I would take it any day of the week. At the same time, there are different ways to get around that, and being elite on the defensive line is one way to hide average linebacker play. So again, is Michigan going to be elite on the defensive line? I don't know if that's going to be the case. Another way to do that is to have someone coming down from the safety position downhill every snap of the game, like a la Jabril Peppers used to do for us, or like a Caleb Downs was able to do for our arch rival these past 2 seasons. That's going to be the case. So again, this is why you bring in someone like a Jay Hill who's able to, quite frankly, implement the correct schemes at the right time. And I think Wink Martindale did a lot of this too during his tenure. Look, he threw some perfect games when we needed to have them, but linebackers getting lost in space, particularly in zone coverage, was a problem the last 2 seasons. I was in person, Steve, for the Michigan-Texas game in Ann Arbor. It was the first football game I've ever taken my son to, and he had to witness what happened out there on that field, which if I had it to do over again, I probably would do it the same, because it was an awesome experience, even though we got our tails kicked. But I'm sitting there in the big house with my 3-year-old at that time son, watching Michigan linebackers just get cooked in space with Steve Sarkisian and at that time quarterback Quinn Ewers just dialing us up. Have we addressed that problem? I don't know. Are we going to do something different scheme-wise to be able to protect from that? I'm not sure. But again, this is why Kyle Whittingham, to me, is the right man for this job, because if you look at the makeup of those Utah defenses, not just the last few years in the Pac-12 when he was beating USC and winning those Pac-12 championships, but really the first few years here in the Big 12, they had a lot of success, considering that they were relying on a quarterback that was just constantly injured, and that was a problem, which I think that's something that we need to talk about too, is Bryce Underwood in the quarterback position, which I'm sure you're going to get to that. But on the defensive side of the ball, there's a lot to question, there's a lot to be concerned about, but also you have to put your trust in what Kyle Whittingham and his staff has been able to do elsewhere, and now they're going to have a lot of talented athletes who are ready to reload, Steve. Like I've said, this has been one area of the program where we have reloaded, and every time we lost someone to the NFL, we look up the next season and say, wow, there's another NFL guy in the making who was biding his time and was developing behind the scenes. The other worry you had was defensive line. I'm actually not worried about edge.
The Michigan program for several years has been one of the best in terms of developing edges, whether it's guys nobody saw coming like Chase Winovich or guys everybody saw coming like Rashawn Gary. David Ojabo, nobody knew who he was at the start of the year. I mean, he ends up being a top 50 NFL draft pick and a millionaire. So we've had several years. I mean, in the 22 season, Mike Morris, I mean, we turned him to the Big Ten Defensive Lineman of the Year, and he's a guy that hasn't played very much in the NFL. So I think between, even if it takes John Henry a couple of games coming off the Achilles, you have Nate Marshall there, 5-star recruit. You have, by the way, another program that has a tradition of developing edges, Utah, right? Yeah. So you're merging those two edge factories. I just think between Lugard and Apayi, Dominic Nichols, given their recruiting profiles, Cam Brandt, John Henry Daly, Nate Marshall, Carter Meadows, I got to think out of those 6 guys, 2 or 3 players who are going to be factors in the fall can be found and developed. I am concerned about the interior. We have not recruited well the last couple of cycles. I mean, Michigan's never going to have, asking Michigan to have Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham again is like saying Alabama, have Eric Curry and John Copeland again. Have LSU, have Glenn Dorsey every year. I mean, we'll probably never going to have that again the rest of our lives, if we're being honest. But right now, I don't have us at the interior defensive line. I don't have any above replacement players returning. I have 3 incoming, but 2 of them are true freshmen, and one of them is a transfer from Utah who's a little undersized at about 285, and he's going to take a step up in competition here in the Big Ten. So, yeah, I am concerned. I mean, guys that we've heard a lot about, Eno Etta, Trey Pierce, David Palapale, who was a big recruit a couple of years ago, they're going to have to – these are blank canvases. They're going to have to demonstrate some real development here over the next few months at that position, I think.
Yeah, and that's my point, is that the guys have done that, at least, for this decade, but even going back to when I played. I mean, look, we had Alan Branch and Lamar Woodley and Brandon Graham on that defensive line, and that's with guys like Prescott Burgess coming up and kind of playing off the edge a bit, too. Also, Aiden Hutchinson was pretty good, too, when we're talking about reloading and being able to, dominate the position. Yeah, exactly. And so this has been not only a strength for Michigan, but as you pointed out, a strength for Utah. I have to trust that this coaching staff, and like you said, some of these guys don't go on to be elite pros. A lot of this is about development. A lot of this is about talent evaluation at the collegiate level and putting guys in the best position possible to be able to go make plays. And that's why, we're going to have to see. Do we have 2, like you said, are you going to have Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham on the same defensive line who come out of the same class ever again? I don't know. But then again, that team won, 8 football games, including the bowl game? So it can be done different ways, and I'm going to put my trust in Coach Whittingham to be able to figure that out.
Finally, let's talk offense, and you brought up Bryce Underwood. When I look at this offense, I don't really see a weakness. I think this offense on paper is absolutely loaded. I think this is a Joe Moore award caliber offensive line with the players we have returning. And then you're adding maybe the best offensive line coach in the country in Jim Harding, who's probably going to have 2 guys picked in the first round as 2 tackles in the draft here in about 90 days. I think this is one of the best running back rooms in the country, to the point that, we, as you mentioned, we brought in the number 1 rated running back in the 2024 class. He's going to play safety to start so he can get on the field faster. I mean, we're losing Justice Haynes, probably the highest paid running back in college football, returning next year. And none of us are concerned about it at all. And nor should we be. And then this is as stacked of a receiver room that I can remember in a while at Michigan. And so I'm thinking back to when we've had teams that were offensively led and won championships. It happens at a lot of schools. It doesn't happen here very often. One team I can think of, it would have been a little before the era you played, but since you were being recruited in this era, you would remember it well. The 03 team with Navarre, Chris Perry won the Doak Walker, Braylon Edwards would go on to become a Blitnikoff winner. Jason Avant played a decade in the NFL. Steve Breston played a decade in the NFL. You had several pro offensive linemen there. The defense that year by Michigan standards was okay. We got into shootouts against Oregon, against Iowa. Yeah, that happened. Against Ohio State, against Minnesota. Yeah, that happened. There were several games, and this is a different era. There were pre-spread offense. So a school like Michigan having to score 30 points a lot to win games was not very common still. And that team did. So that's one team I can think of, that was offensively led here and still won a championship, because I don't see a question mark on offense with one exception, and that's the quarterback. Yeah. All right. Bryce Underwood, to me, given the caliber of coaching upgrade he's about to get, you saw what Jason Beck did with Devin Dampier this last year at Utah from what we saw at New Mexico 2 years ago. The offensive line in front of him, the weapons around him. I mean, to me, with his recruiting profile, there is zero excuse for why we're not talking about him next November as, did he make the biggest sophomore jump of any quarterback in college football?
Well, when your biggest question mark on offense is the player who was the highest rated recruit in program history, you're pretty loaded on offense. And as far as some of those names go, you mentioned I was fortunate enough to play with some of those guys. Stevie Breston was an awesome teammate. So, yeah, I mean, look, we already laid it out. I think that Michigan is going to be not just have elite playmakers on offense, but they're also going to have some depth. And some of that will require someone like Jamie French to come over and look, you need to be a bona fide ball player, right? So that Andrew Marsh isn't getting doubled. Look, push to be the best wide receiver on the team. I mean, that's when you would have an elite wide receiver combo like I'm watching him do in Columbus every single year. I'm interested to see what J.J. Buchanan does from the tight end pass catcher position. How much will he play split out and all that? But yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. How much is Bryce Underwood going to be a difference maker? Not a really good quarterback, not, hey, you can spit the ball out and help win some games. An absolute difference maker, because that's what you were recruited to be. And when you get talked about, like from a recruiting standpoint, with the same names as the Trevor Lawrences and Cam Newtons and Tim Tebow's, then that's what you have to be. And I think that if he can take and look, not that he needs to be the best version of a football player that he's ever going to be as a sophomore, but if he can be up to this point the best football player that he's ever been, combined with what they're bringing back on the offensive side of the football, then I do think that Michigan on offense is going to be a force to be reckoned with, and they'll keep from having to turn it over to the defense to say, hey, sorry, defensive coordinator, sorry, the starting 22 there on defense, but you're going to have to be the game winners for us and be the difference makers. We don't want that anymore, and it doesn't necessarily just have to do with throwing the ball, Steve. This is what we said on our show today. Explosive plays can come from the run game. Look at what Jim Harbaugh did in that 3-year stint where we were winning the Big Ten that culminated with a national.
Hey, Justice Haynes and Jordan Marshall last year both had 4 runs apiece over 50 yards last year.
I mean, Justice Haynes was on my top 5 plays list every week with a run over 60 yards. Explosive plays can happen on the ground. Explosive plays can happen on the ground in the run game from the quarterback position. We saw Bryce do that. Are you making the correct reads? Like you and I talked about in December, there were wide receivers wide open against the Buckeyes, and our number 1 recruit threw for 60 yards. That's in the past. Learn from that experience. All the lumps that he took, he shouldn't have had to start as an 18-year-old kid. We should be watching Bryce Underwood come out in year 2 like a Julian Sayin got a chance to do, or year 3 like an Arch Manning had the luxury of doing at Texas. He didn't have that luxury because of depth chart issues post Jim Harbaugh. He had to start as an 18 or 17-year-old kid. Use that to your advantage now. Let's hit the ground running, and let's be the most explosive offense in the country.
Great stuff, brother. Always good to see you. Thanks for joining us, man, and congrats on the new dibs there, or the new gig there at On3.
Thank you so much for having me. Come see me in Nashville soon, brother.
You got it, man. Go Blue. Take care, David.
Blue.
Finally, this week's X-Poll results, we asked you, how would you grade Kyle Whittingham's job assembling a coaching staff, retaining the roster, and adding to it during the portal? 75% of you said A, which I think is the only correct answer. It's been an incredible job. 20% of you said B, 5% of you said C, which means you're either trolls or Buckeyes, but I repeat myself. Finally, this week's feedback of the week, let's go to a basketball thing. BH says, these old school unis are legit. There you can see the picture there, the tweet of mine that he's responding to. Those mixture of the 80s era Big Ten Michigan uniforms and then the Fab Five who brought the maize uniforms into play, by merging those old school 80s uniforms with the Fab Five maize, those are some of the best uniforms in college basketball. I mean, that ought to be Michigan's permanent home uniform, if you ask me. Those things, she's a Butte Clark. I mean, those things are pretty to look at. They're fantastic. So I agree, BH. They're legit. All right, you guys have been legit for hanging in here, and hopefully we gave you a lot of legit information for you to think about, talk about, what you can do right here in the comments section here on YouTube or iTunes or anywhere else that you access Michigan Podcast. And please don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, share, 5-star review, all of those things, whether on YouTube or a podcast platform. They help us to find more Michigan fans just like you and continue to grow the show. And we appreciate you for each and every one of those. We'd also appreciate it if you joined us in between episodes by following us on X at Michigan Podcast on X. That's at Michigan Podcast on X. Until the next time here on MP, I'm Steve Day saying, go Blue.